Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the economy in Russia, and specifically to talk about the peace negotiations that are ongoing between the USA and Russia with regards to its invasion and subsequent occupation of part of Ukraine. Now, over the past month or so, since Donald Trump took over as the president, it's looked inevitable that some sort of peace agreement was going to be struck between the USA and Russia because, in his run into being elected as president, Donald Trump said that he could bring the war to a conclusion within one day. And obviously, the only way that would realistically be possible would be to concede all of the land that Russia is currently occupying, because Russia is not going to retreat from that territory, and therefore the only way to persuade President Putin to sign some sort of peace agreement would be to agree to all of that land becoming part of an enlarged Russia, and then to set up some sort of divide between the new Russia and the old Ukraine. And basically, the way that's been discussed is that Europe would have to provide some sort of peacekeeping forces, because the USA has said that it won't send any troops to help with that. And over the past few weeks, we've seen a breakdown in relations between the USA and Ukraine. On the 18th of February, a meeting was held in Saudi Arabia between US and Russian officials. However, Ukraine was not invited to that meeting. And on the 19th of February, Donald Trump released this post on his Truth social media platform, which said a modestly successful comedian, Volodymyr Zelensky, talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that couldn't be won, that never had to start, but a war that he, without the US and Trump, would never be able to settle. The United States has spent $200 billion more than Europe, and Europe's money is guaranteed, while the United States will get nothing back. Why didn't sleepy Joe Biden demand equalisation, in that this war is far more important to Europe than it is to us? We have a big, beautiful ocean as separation. On top of this, Zelensky admits that half of the money we sent him is missing. He refuses to have elections, is very low in Ukrainian polls, and the only thing he was good at was playing Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast, or he is not going to have a country left. In the meantime, we are successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia, something all admit only Trump and the Trump administration can do. Biden never tried, Europe has failed to bring peace, and Zelensky probably wants to keep the gravy train going. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job, his country is shattered, and millions have unnecessarily died, and so it continues. So at that stage, things were looking fairly bleak from Ukraine's point of view, and it looked like everything was going the way that President Putin of Russia wanted it to. However, over the course of the last week or so, things have changed materially. Donald Trump announced that he wanted Ukraine to sign a $500 billion rare earth supply deal with the USA as a way of repaying all of the aid that the USA had provided to Ukraine so far. And interestingly, after agreeing heads of terms on that deal, President Zelensky of Ukraine is now flying to Washington to sign that agreement. So what we're seeing here is a situation where Russia looked like they were going to get everything that they wanted from the invasion of Ukraine and be able to sign a peace agreement with Donald Trump, has now done a full U-turn, and the USA and Ukraine are now getting into bed together on this mineral supply agreement, and that potentially could derail the peace agreement that's been on the table with Russia. And the knee-jerk reaction from President Putin was that he immediately offered to sell all of the critical minerals that Ukraine is offering to supply to the USA directly from Russia. Now, interestingly, Donald Trump hasn't responded to that offer from President Putin, but he has backtracked on calling President Zelensky a dictator.
Mr. President, do you still think that Mr. Zelensky is a dictator?
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question.
And in terms of an update on the peace process itself, he recently said this.
We're working very hard to get that war brought to an end. I think we've made a lot of progress, and I think it's moving along pretty rapidly. It'll either be fairly soon or it won't be at all.
Now, that is a really interesting statement by Donald Trump, because up until now, he's been saying that the war in Ukraine needs to end. He was going to bring it to a swift conclusion. However, he's now saying that either it will end swiftly or not at all. So that indicates that Russia might not be given everything that they want, that this war could go on indefinitely, and that would be an absolute disaster from Russia's point of view, because if you've been following the channel, you'll be aware that the Russian economy is in severe difficulty at the moment. The sanctions are really starting to hurt Russia. We're seeing rising inflation. We've got really weird things going on with regards to the value of the ruble that I've talked about in other videos. But the situation can't continue from Russia's point of view. It's not sustainable. But Donald Trump is now indicating that there could be a future plan whereby the USA continues in the role that it's been taking up until now. And we'll go on to talk about that later in the video, as well as the mineral supplies that Ukraine can provide to the USA, what that deal looks like, and why Russia is trying to break into that agreement. And we'll also have a look at what mineral supplies Russia has actually taken over in the occupied Ukraine territory. And this will probably give you an indication as to one of the reasons why Russia wanted to invade that area of Ukraine. But before we get into all of that, I want to talk to you about Ground News, who I've partnered with for today's video. And I've been working with Ground News for the past 2.5 years. And they're offering Joe Blogs viewers an exclusive deal whereby you can get a 40% discount on the Vantage plan, which is what I use. And what's brilliant about Ground News is that they're a news aggregator. They bring together stories from all around the world. And if we look at the articles that Ground News have pulled together talking about today's topic, you can see that they found 98 different articles. And what's great about Ground News is that they tell you whether those media sources lean to the left, lean to the right, or come from the centre. And that's really important to me when I'm trying to provide balanced coverage. And Ground News is offering Joe Blogs viewers a 40% discount on the Vantage plan, which you can access by scanning the QR code on the screen now or clicking in the link in the description below. This map shows the critical raw materials located all across Ukraine. And as you can see from the graphic on the left-hand side here, Ukraine holds around 5% of the global supply of these critical raw materials. The specific location of these raw materials is colour coding. You can see the colour-coded chart in the bottom right-hand corner here. And if we quickly run through the colour coding, you can see that beryllium deposits are shown in brown, graphite in yellow, lithium in green, titanium and zirconium in purple, non-ferrous metals in light blue, polymetallic ores in red, rare earth elements in light green, iron in grey, manganese in pink, and uranium in a brown-green khaki colour. Now, you may not be familiar with all of these different elements and what they're used for, but they are used in a wide variety of applications that are critical for things like the defence industry, the production of batteries, nuclear power, nuclear weapons, and other things that are absolutely critical to the future of the USA's development. And one of the reasons why the war in Ukraine has been so contentious is that Russia is currently occupying around 20% of Ukraine, much of which holds these really critical minerals. And it was recently claimed by Ukraine's Minister of Economy that the area that's currently occupied by Russia contains around $350 billion worth of Ukrainian mineral resources. Now, many of the minerals that we've just looked at on that map haven't actually been fully developed. Ukraine hasn't had the infrastructure in place to be able to start extracting everything. And the deal that's been put forward by Donald Trump and the USA is that they will set up a joint venture agreement whereby the USA will help Ukraine to develop all of those minerals, to extract them, and then as part of that deal, 50% will be provided to the USA, and the other 50% will be used to fund a reconstruction fund for Ukraine. The terms of the deal say that the countries will establish a reconstruction investment fund to collect and reinvest revenues from Ukrainian resources. Representatives from both countries will then jointly manage the fund. Ukraine will contribute to the fund 50% of its revenues earned from Ukrainian state-owned natural resources. Contributions to the fund will be reinvested in Ukraine to promote the safety, security and prosperity. The United States will provide a long-term financial commitment to the development of a stable and economically prosperous Ukraine. The fund will aim to invest in Ukrainian projects and attract investment in public and private assets, including natural resources, infrastructure, ports and state-owned enterprises. The agreement will include concrete steps to establish lasting peace and to strengthen economic security resilience, and the US government will support Ukraine's effort to obtain security guarantees needed to establish lasting peace. However, there is no mention of US security guarantees. Now, as we discussed earlier in the video, President Putin of Russia is very unhappy about this turn of events. it looks now like the USA and Ukraine are forming close bonds. They're going to have a working relationship to develop all of those rare earth minerals and other things that the USA needs. And one of the reasons for that is because the USA simply doesn't have enough of its own rare earth materials. As you can see from this graphic, the largest deposits are in China, Brazil, India, Australia, and Russia. And currently the USA has a 70% dependence on China. And if you've been following the channel, you'll know that the relationship between China and the USA is currently on a knife edge as a result of the additional tariffs and restrictions that Donald Trump has applied against Chinese imports. And in order to try to derail the deal between the USA and Ukraine, in a recent televised interview in Russia, President Putin said, "We would be ready to cooperate with our American partners if they showed interest in working together," and went on to add that as an order of magnitude, Russia has more resources of this kind than Ukraine. He name-checked mineral resources in Russia's north, the Caucasus, and the Far East, as well as Donbass, a Ukrainian region occupied by Russian forces. And specifically referring to the parts of Ukraine that Russia has seized, he said, "We are ready to attract foreign partners, and in our so-called new historical territories, which have returned to the Russian Federation, there are also certain reserves there. We are ready to work with our foreign partners, including the Americans there." To sweeten the deal further, he said that Russia would consider working with the US to produce aluminium, and noted that if American companies work with Moscow, they will make good money and the corresponding volumes of aluminium will enter the domestic market at absolutely acceptable market prices. Now, I think this is a really interesting turn of events because President Putin here is offering the USA a trade partnership agreement. It's saying that US firms can go into Russian territory and start developing all these mineral resources. And this is obviously a huge change from where we are right now because over the past 3 years, the USA has been applying more and more sanctions against Russia, and Russia actually deems the USA to be a non-friendly nation. So the relationship is currently at an all-time low. However, President Putin is offering to do trade things together. He wants the US companies to come over to Russia and start working in conjunction with them to set up joint ventures. And obviously, over the past 3 years, we've seen most American companies actually leaving Russia and saying that they've got no interest in doing any business going forward. So we're seeing a really mixed message here from President Putin. I think this really shows that he's worried at the moment that the peace negotiations are about to be taken off the table. The USA may get closer to Ukraine and continue its support. And if that happens, that would be absolutely disastrous for Russia and the Russian economy. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think what's happened over the course of the past couple of weeks is really quite interesting. When Donald Trump took over as the president, it looked fairly cut and dry that he was going to negotiate some form of peace deal with Russia that potentially wouldn't even include Europe or Ukraine. They haven't actually joined any of the discussions so far. They've just been between the USA and Russia. And this looked like it was playing very much into the hands of President Putin. He was going to get exactly what he wanted. He was going to keep all of the area of Ukraine that's currently occupied and potentially have a nice outcome. And as we've talked about, that area of Ukraine actually has some really valuable resources. There are mineral deposits in that land that potentially could be worth up to $350 billion, which interestingly would offset the $300 billion that's currently frozen by the unfriendly nations. All the countries from the West have seized those assets. Russia have said that that's illegal, they want it back. And there's been a lot of talk about what should happen with that $300 billion. But if Russia can keep the land that it's currently occupying and develop all of those mineral reserves, it would basically be paid back and actually a bit more in terms of what it's lost. So you can start understanding one of the reasons why Russia wanted to invade this area of Ukraine, because it's actually quite valuable in terms of the global supply of some of these rare earth minerals that are very difficult to source, but are really important for things like the defense sector, the nuclear sector, and batteries, which are really important to both the solar and electric vehicle markets. Now, interestingly, what we've seen over the course of the last week is that things seem to have changed materially. Up until now, Donald Trump has just been talking about how much the USA has given to Ukraine and how that hasn't really been equitable in terms of how much Europe has given. But what we've seen in today's video is that he's come out and worked out a plan as to how the USA can recoup its money. And that plan is based upon the development of rare earth and other mineral deposits in Ukraine with American companies. They want to go in and set up joint ventures and be able to get the benefit of the revenues from that, as well as being able to secure the supply to the USA, because a lot of those sort of minerals are currently being purchased from China. And if China cuts off the USA's supplies, that could cause major problems for a lot of US businesses. So this potential partnership going forward may change the whole face of the peace discussions, because if the USA is now getting closer to Ukraine, if there's a financial benefit that the USA can develop in terms of this relationship, then it may change Donald Trump's perspective in terms of the peace negotiations. And we heard earlier from him directly that he said that either they will come to a swift conclusion or they may not happen at all. And if the peace negotiations are taken off the table, that would be seriously bad news for Russia, because it would mean that the war would potentially go on indefinitely. And as we've talked about a lot, there are some serious problems building in the Russian economy. We've got rising inflation at the moment. We've also got very high wages. We've got a labour shortage because the Kremlin has commandeered lots of Russian businesses to work to keep supplying things for the war in Ukraine. And all of this is adding up to future problems, in addition to all of the sanctions and the problems that Russia has currently being able to find enough buyers for its oil and gas. So President Putin is very keen on bringing the war to a swift conclusion. He's playing it very casually. Obviously, he doesn't want to expose himself and say, yes, that's what I want as well. But Russia has engaged very quickly with the USA in terms of the peace negotiations that have been put forward by Donald Trump. And if they are now removed, if the USA is happy getting closer to Ukraine and getting some sort of trading agreement in place that works for the USA, then the war could go on for a lot longer than President Putin is currently budgeting for. And if that happens, it would be a disaster. And we saw President Putin coming out immediately and saying, don't do the deal with Ukraine, do the deal with Russia. We've got more mineral reserves than Ukraine has. We'd be happy for American companies to come over here and start developing them. And obviously that is a completely different attitude to what Russia has had for the past 3 years. So the overall summary of today's video is that the peace negotiations put forward by Donald Trump that looked like they were going to be a foregone conclusion and give all of the current occupied territory that Russia's sitting on over to Russia, look like they potentially could be unwound if the USA gets closer to Ukraine, if it's happy to form some sort of commercial partnership that works for the USA's perspective, then potentially those peace negotiations could be taken off the table, and that would be seriously bad news for Russia and the Russian economy. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end. Thank you also to everybody that's supporting the channel. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks or signed up as a patron or a member, thank you so much. It really does help keep me motivated, helps me to keep producing as much content as I can. And for everybody that's watched this video, here's something to put a smile on your face.